Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shadoe at Night. This is Wednesday, August the 13th, 2025. And on the show tonight of the United Party of Canada, he's also running as a candidate in the by-election in Alberta on Monday, the Crowfoot, Battle River, Battle Creek. I always mess that one up, but that's the by-election coming up next Monday. 214 different candidates are going to be on the ballot for that one. Notably, Grant Abraham and Pierre Poilievre. And there was a debate in that riding a couple of weeks ago. Grant got up with the microphone and he had a few words. But I would imagine and we'll ask Grant this as well, but I would imagine everybody who was involved in that debate when they got up with the microphone had something to say directly to Pierre. And here is an excerpt of Grant speaking at that debate.
Well, the truth is, in Canada, we have a two-tier justice system. The convoy taught us that our Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms means almost nothing. And we have people sitting in jail as political prisoners in this country, and pastors in Calgary, I might add, because they decided to protest pornography inside a public library. And so we need to look at these issues and one asks exactly why it is this system's not working. And this is one of the main reasons when you look at the imbalance in our Constitution, the broken electoral system that we have in terms of always watching our Prime Minister be decided in Thunder Bay, that we actually need to look at Alberta independence and say, we can fix this, we can lose the crown, we can establish a constitutional republic here in Alberta and entrench the inalienable rights, because we have a corrupt system that is two-tiered. You know what? This confederation is broken. It has a rotten basement. And I think that Central Canada needs to start to recognize that enough is enough.
Thanks, Grant.
Yeah, this is something Grant and I talked about on the phone the other day. We're going to talk more about that extensively tonight in just a couple of minutes. Now, for you Rumble people who are watching live, we've had a technical glitch in the studio with Rumble for the past couple of weeks, and I haven't been able to see you. But that glitch has been solved, and so now I can see you, and I can say hello to Andy Rock, who is watching on Rumble tonight, and Cosford, and Goshi26, and Dyson, and Canonon Patriot, and Dog Park Lady, and Vilma, and Porter Boy, Starliner 1961, White Grub 12. Welcome to the show, you guys. I'm glad you're here still with me on Rumble as our audience continues to grow there. Carla is watching on Facebook tonight in Calgary. Heather is watching in Edmonton on YouTube. Hello, Ken in Australia. Linda's watching from Durham, Ontario on Facebook. Debbie is watching on YouTube in Arborg, Manitoba. Jeannie, hello in Calgary. Susie is watching from somewhere in Ontario. Hello, Barbara. Jim, it's Jim from Georgetown, not Barbara. So you're on your wife's Facebook account. Is that what that is? Janet's watching in Newfoundland on YouTube. Roseanne is watching in Southern Manitoba. Whatever platform you're watching on, guys, wherever you're watching from, don't forget to like and share. We need some change, real change in this country. And quite possibly one of the men who can give it to us is going to join us on the show tonight. Grant Abraham of the United Party of Canada will be with us in 30 seconds. Hello, Grant. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining tonight. I know you're busy these past couple of weeks.
Battle River-Crowfoot. It is a mouthful to say. I appreciate
it. Battle River. I know.
Yeah, well, it's a well-named riding, and there's great people in it, and it really does host some of the most profound discussions going on in the country right now, albeit in terms of the mainstream media beneath the waterline. But there's a lot at stake in this discussion in Battle River, this election in Battle River-Crowfoot. So the two Canadas are up to play for, and what's really going on. I think this will be a theme as we talk tonight, Shadoe. What's actually boiling in the pot beneath everything that's going on that the nation's not seeing and not discussing.
Can you talk about that stuff? Some of the stuff we talked about on the phone the other day. Are you willing to discuss that?
Sure. I think we have had long enough where we've been muted and controlled by mainstream media. We have politicians that have talking points that are essentially whipped and muzzled. And there's things happening in this country that our parents, our grandparents for sure, would never have tolerated. And there's much to talk about.
So let me ask you, in the last election campaign, this show was focused on bringing the right together and making sure that Carney and the Liberals didn't win. That's what I was particularly focused on. The corruption in the Conservative Party and some of their positions, their questionable positions, I ignored those because I wanted Carney out. But now, as things have unfolded, what I'm seeing is a quick decline of our country. I mean, China just put 100% tariffs on our canola, and they took effect in the last couple of days. That's going to be devastating for farmers, particularly in Western Canada. Mark Carney does not have a deal with the United States yet. He's talking about a new Bill C-63 that's going to censor Canadians worse than before. He's going to bring back the carbon tax in some way, shape, or form. He never did eliminate that tax. He just reduced it to zero for the time being. And he does openly discuss taxing big business and big polluters, and somehow that cost is not going to come trickling down to the consumer. So now that we're out of an election, and I would assume that we're not going to have another federal election for a couple of years, unless something crazy happens. We are in a minority situation. We can talk about how to reform this country. We can talk about systemic change, some of the stuff you were talking about. For example, in that Canada's Broken clip that we just played, I mean, you were suggesting different ways that we can rebuild this country. Can we get Canada back to where it once was, or is it far too late with the immigration and the rampant change of industry from the way it's been for years into this new green thing? Is it even possible to go back?
That's a question that remains to be seen. It remains for Canadians to actually maybe switch the lights on and see what has been being told to us for many years now. And I go back, I suppose I started to get alarmed with what I was hearing from the Liberal government in 2018 when I heard Justin Trudeau say that Canada would be the first post-nation state. That's a state that is, after its existence as a nation. And what he meant was by that was a state that's ruled by the UN. That is why the British people left the European Union and did Brexit in 2016. It's interesting that Mark Carney was there, the Bank of England governor, resisting that all the way. But then we heard that COVID had provided us with an opportunity for a reset. Then we heard about ample evidence of foreign interference that is so severe and sustained that it's undermining our democracy and our political institutions. And then if you listen to the Liberal leadership debate there in March, you had Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland tripping over themselves, actually, to tell us that we're going to be safe and secure inside the New World Order, albeit outside of the U.S.'s influence, because the U.S. had left the New World Order. And from my part, and I appreciate your strategic communication there before the general election, but from my part, my view has always been that what the Liberals are doing intentionally to this country, the Conservatives are enabling by omission. And I ask the question often when I speak, when was the last time you heard a Conservative MP or a Prime Minister or Andrew Scheer or Aaron O'Toole or Pierre Poilievre say, excuse me, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Carney, whoever, can you tell us what post-nationalism, what do you mean by a reset? Why aren't we dealing with foreign interference? What is a New World Order? Those questions have repeatedly not been asked, and you would have thought those would have been the most obvious and alarming things to ask, especially for an opposition that wanted to attain power. So we're actually seeing the implementation of a new software program being inserted into the country. It's essentially a collectivist agenda that is predicated upon Agenda 2030. And that's what's being folded into our nation. And that's why Canadians all across this country are saying, where has our country gone? And so, that is the preamble to the discussion. There's a lot of pieces there. To get to your question, and maybe the best way for me to answer this was there was this very gentleman farmer that came to a couple of my meetings in this last couple of weeks. He came to one, then he came back to another one, and he listened. And I always have an open mic. The crowd gets to ask questions. We don't do pre-screening. If you want to get in to see Pierre Poilievre, you got to sign up, take all your details, and any questions that you want to ask, they get pre-screened. And that's the way those events work. So I have an open mic. At the end of the second meeting, this farmer came up to me and he said, can I just ask you a question? I said, yeah, absolutely. He said, look, he says, I think what I hear you saying is that Justin Trudeau built the foundation and Mark Carney's here to build the wall for a prison. Is that what you're saying? And I thought, wow, he said that. He said that in about 27 seconds. And it took me 4.5 hours to explain it all to him with all the evidence, So, but I think that's where we're actually at in the country. And that's the wisdom of farmers. They see it. It's what's going on. I mean, the campaign in Battle River-Crowfoot, Pierre Poilievre is running on a platform of basically continuing equalization, continuing let's say the narrative of Confederation, and talking about releasing and unleashing Alberta energy. And there was another clip bouncing around the internet where I'm asking Pierre Poilievre how he's going to unleash Alberta energy and stay inside the UN Paris Climate Accord. And faith, family, and freedom is not being conserved by the Conservative Party. And these are the bigger conversations, I think, that are happening at the doorsteps, in town halls, in Battle River-Crowfoot, and people aren't happy, and they're seeing that their little blue security blanket is not working for them.
Let me ask you this. How many people were in that debate, by the way?
Well, the Long Ballot Committee is a distraction in the news. They're not out there. They don't have signs. They don't come to debates. They're just kind of an administrative annoyance. My view is that the Long Ballot Committee benefits the person that has the most name recognition in the riding, actually, and it distracts the media from actually taking the time or justifying the time to delve in to the candidates that aren't on the Long Ballot Committee and aren't the most identified name. And so it's about 10 of us. There are several independents. There's an NDP candidate, a Liberal candidate, a PPC candidate, a Libertarian candidate, Christian Heritage Party candidate. As I said, a couple of independents and then myself as well as Mr. Poilievre.
What was your impression of Mr. Poilievre when you were in that debate? And, you know, I mean, the clips that I've found, and I've got that one that you were just talking about, got that from Instagram. They focus on his facial expressions at the end, like he doesn't really know what to say. He's hoping this ends quickly. What was your personal impression of him? Because I know you're an observer.
Well, I think it's an opinion. It's a personal opinion. My impression of him coming into the debate in Camrose, which was the first he attended two of the four debates, the one that he came into in Camrose, I think he thought that it may be easier than it was in terms of some of the issues that were raised. There's quite a vocal independent candidate in the riding as well that is taking a lot of pot shots at Poilievre as well.
Are you talking about Critchley, Bonnie Critchley,
yeah,
that one?
Yeah, I am. And then in the next one that he came to, which was in Drumheller, they're very controlled affairs in terms of times and questions. It's not truly a debate. It's actually more of a series of 1 minute blurbs of people talking. But I felt that he was much more subdued and reflective in that second meeting. And my impression is from the Conservative Party, actually, that they probably used logic in their analysis about where to run him in a by-election from 7 years ago, because they've completely missed the context of what's actually going on in Canada geopolitically with the Americans, the reality of what Canadians evidenced or saw in the last election with the Conservatives deciding to undertake retaliatory tariffs. When President Trump asked us simply to clean up fentanyl production and human trafficking, he didn't ask us to, change the percentage of fat in our milk. He was very clear about what those were, and all of a sudden we had a conservative leader telling the nation that we were going to have a retaliatory trade war with the Americans that we all know, how with a little bit of gray hair out there, that we've never won, and we do the best actually sailing off of the goodwill and amazingly favored position we have with the Americans. So there are a lot of things that have changed from the kind of the general narrative of the blue wall that started somewhere after Saskatchewan and ended before Ontario, north to south. That was the conservative wall that protected the West, where people are looking at these discussions about what Trump is saying. They're recognizing that there are other threats that we're actually hosting. People are seeing that the Americans perceive that we're actually a threat to continental security with what we're hosting here ideologically and even physically / kinetically. And these are real conversations in this little veneer world that Canadians live in, and where we only talk about the symptoms on issues is wearing thin, and people are tuning in to the deeper issues. And Alberta's fed up paying. There's $1 trillion nearly since 1960. You probably know that. It's not quite $1 billion yet. We're fed up with Ottawa in our lane. You saw in that clip there, I was kind of spieling off the fact that we learned very clearly with the COVID and after the convoy that there's not a lot of traction to be found inside our Charter of Rights and Freedoms in terms of what we thought that meant and celebrated in the mid 80s after that came out as proud Canadians. And Brian Peckford's case not getting to the Supreme Court was a great evidence that they just didn't want to have that conversation.
Yeah, there's something seriously wrong in this country. Battle River-Crowfoot is a large riding, and I'm sure you've been all around it hosting town halls and trying to knock on as many doors as possible. What's the vibe in that riding? I know it's largely rural. What's the vibe regarding sovereignty?
it's a conversation. I was talking to someone over the weekend about this, and I think actually, you know, I ran in the federal election, the general election in April in Ponoka-Didsbury, which is a riding just to the west of here on the other side of Red Deer. And I think the dial has moved towards independence and thinking about independence. The APP here in Alberta has done a great job these last few years in terms of waking up Albertans to what that would mean for them economically or jurisprudentially, or even in relation to, you know, what being outside of the shadow of Ottawa overreach. So the way I describe Alberta right now, maybe if you took 10 Albertans that represented the collective population of Alberta, 2 of them probably aren't tuned in or care. If you talk to them generally about Ottawa overreach and the reality of how we feel about watching general elections happen and finding out the prime minister before BC's voted, all those things that we've talked about all our lifetimes about irritation, the imbalance in the Constitution, the fact that the West is really an economic colony as a subsidizer of central Canada, all of those issues. I would say that 8 out of 10 Albertans would say, yeah, we're fed up. We want to see a smaller government. We want to see Ottawa get back in its lane. And if it takes, let's use the word sovereignty, more sovereignty for Alberta, they'd be there. If you amp up that conversation and you say, we're not going to become Americans, but we're leaving Canada, we're actually self-determining in international law. And this is where I think the language in Alberta is getting more precise. It's not just okay to talk about sovereignty anymore. If you say sovereignty in Alberta, people say, well, what do you mean? Do you mean independence and separation? Or do you really mean stay within the monarchy? You know, whatever way that they individuate the distinction, there is a distinction being made. So I would say 8 out of 10 would celebrate hey, we need Ottawa, Central Canada out of our lane. If you say, look, I think we're going to leave this country and we're going to set up a constitutional republic, we're going to lose the crown. There's probably 3 that would say yes. There's a 4th one who is mostly colored towards leaving. And the other 4 are still trying to deal with their fear about Canada pension. What would that look like? You know, we love Canada. We don't want to be Americans. And yet they can't deny the reality of all the things that are being said. And I think when you start to, I mean, this has been an amazing week in the news, right? Because when, you know, talking to Albertans this week, when they're looking at the judgment in BC, the BC Supreme Court judgment, where they're suddenly rolling Indigenous land claims onto what we thought was our Torin system. You know, the title is king, where we've lived in the western of Canada for nearly 100 years, where you couldn't have any equitable interests attached to title. Suddenly, you're looking at this ruling is saying there can be Indigenous land claims on what you thought was essentially your fee simple ownership on title. That is rattling a lot of cages. The implications of that are massive. That falls in line with this agenda within Agenda 2030, within post-nationalism, to disassociate people from ownership, from resiliency, from community, from their culture, values, traditions, laws, and control the borders. And this is a big mosh pit of issues that are basically disconnecting people from the Canada that we grew up in and love, that's in our hearts. But we thought we had a strong foundation, and that's what I was referring to in my comment there. We thought we had a good foundation, but the basement's rotten. And there's things we could talk about here about the referendum. We can talk about Westminster Act. And that's something that's significant for all Canadians to understand. That's a statute from the United Kingdom that's existed since 1931.
Yeah,
it has significant bearing for all Canadians and the provinces in Canada, not for the federal government.
Brad, I want to come back to the Alberta question in just a second. Let's get back to Poilievre and the Conservatives. Why do you believe that there is such a disparity between the Conservative Party of Canada and conservatism in general? Why is it that Pierre Poilievre was still suggesting that Ukraine should be bolstered by Canada when we have no actual alliance with them? They're not in NATO. We are.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any real anything to gain in that at all. And we have a lot to lose, and we have so far. And there have been other things as well. They don't really call out the climate alarmism as much as they should. I see today that Michelle Rempel-Garner has been piping off, and she's been talking about a couple of things regarding immigration, finally. And Poilievre only started talking about this mass immigration in the final week of the election campaign, whereas before that, he was fumbling and stumbling with the whole Trump issue. What is this disconnect? Is it them trying to reach more Canadians? Is it a strategic thing, or is it something else altogether? Are they controlled by the same people as the Liberals? We're dealing with a uniparty.
Yeah, I think it's a uniparty thing. I think there's a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain that somewhere that is controlling the strings. I think for a long time they were pushing immigration. Let's be frank about that. Mr. Poilievre was talking about and selling the idea of on nonstop flights from Amherst to Canada, and he was completely disconnecting our housing price issues from demand that was arising because we have such a massively increased immigration in this country. So he's done a complete flip-flop on those issues. I suppose I saw the belly of the beast when I was inside the Conservative Party myself, and I couldn't rationalize what I held as conservative views, what I call Burkean conservatism viewpoints. And what I started to see was something else. And I spent quite a bit of time in 2023 writing a book on the series of evidences that show that the Conservative Party has actually left the conservative people, but they essentially have Stockholm syndrome, and they're still in love with their abusers. Because what is it that they're conserving? It's not the parental authority. It's not life. It's not the relationship with the U.S. It's not protecting Canadians in relation to organized crime. I can go on and on and on. And there's this double talk of faith, family, and freedom, but they're doing exactly the opposite. So I just think my analysis has simply been that the ship called the Conservative Party of Canada has been hijacked by a malevolent force. And most of those MPs, if they're aware of it, they're locked out of the command center on that ship, and the ship's going in a direction. And that's where I have a lot of patience and grace for those people, because they've been probably whipped into positions that they never would have wanted to vote for themselves, and know very well that their constituents wouldn't want them to vote for either. And, honestly, one of the issues that is waking people up in this Battle River-Crowfoot discussion is a social conservative issue. There's all the economic stuff that we can talk about Alberta separatism and what we could do with $20 billion a year that we didn't send away. But one of the biggest issues is this issue of conversion therapy, Bill C-4. And that bill was the bill that will criminalize a parent or a grandparent if they try and stop a child transitioning and kind of return their cognitive understanding with their sex at birth. And that's what's called conversion therapy. And when people realize that bill was brought in the 1st of December 2021 by Rob Moore in the House of Commons, and it was actually read in not with a yes/no vote for everyone to say yay or nay. They brought it in as a unanimous consent motion so that the bill would pass all three readings in one go if no one said nay. So if I have the clip somewhere, and you can hear the Speaker of the House saying, we're going to implement this bill. Does anybody say nay? Silence. And he asks again, does anyone say nay? Silence. You probably have seen that, Shadoe. And I think a lot of the social conservative, former reform party people who are hearing this, that they may now be open to prosecution criminally for 5 years if they get in the way of that transition. That bill was done by the Conservative Party. They're just disgusted, and they think, how can that happen? And they loved their former MP, Mr. Couric, and there's no doubt that bill happened. He did not say nay that day, and they're coming to the realization that obviously there are muzzles and whips inside the Conservative Party that are silencing and muting what should be good people speaking up.
So who are these muzzles and whips at the very top of that party? I mean, last time you were on, we talked about the men in gray suits, the shadowy figures behind the walls. And, we know the Liberals are controlled. We know Mark Carney was placed in the position that he's currently in. We know this. I mean, if there's anybody out there by now who thinks that governments of any country or any province or state are actually making the decisions behind closed doors, they're absolutely delusional. They're the ones, in my opinion, who should be wearing the tinfoil hats. So, and again, it's a very vague question, because I know you can't actually name names. We don't know any of the names. Maybe Stephen Harper, who could be at the top of this conservative train, driving it instead of Pierre Poilievre. But are they different interests running the different parties, or is it all the same umbrella over top of both, and even the NDP for that matter?
My view now is that our political systems have been hijacked. They've been hijacked. Maybe when we talked, I think the last interview we did was in 2023, Shadoe, and I think I probably wisely said it was the Men in Black or something like that, as a metaphor for this membrane of human evil that is seeking to undermine the good in humanity and life, liberty, and happiness, if you want to use those terms generically. If I would have come on here 2 or 3 years ago and talked about the New World Order, I would have been dismissed as being a conspiracy theory. I think that's what you're just alluding to. Yeah. Now we have a Liberal Prime Minister actually saying it. Chrystia Freeland is on the board of directors, of the WEF, I think. There's a lot of integration with these agendas. That is the marketing agency for the UN agenda. UN Agenda 2030 is an insidious piece of legislation that has the ability to sound quite flattering to the ear, but when you actually look at what it means in terms of property, wealth, your ability to own things or transfer things, it's completely an assault upon our culture, values, and traditions, and understanding of a free market society that wants small government. And in this case now, it's not just an ideological undermining, it's actually a reprogramming that is changing the nation in ways that will be very difficult to return to, probably without a revolution. And I don't think we're at a revolution stage yet. I think there's still scope for intelligent conversation about this, but I defy people to actually have this conversation about what does a New World Order mean. We've got a litany of opportunities that haven't been engaged by the Conservatives on this. And why is it that we're voting for 11 spies that are running as MPs? This whole discussion about foreign interference and the security clearance, and why the leader of the loyal opposition of this country wouldn't actually. I understand why the Liberals aren't telling us completely, because they're.
No, wait a minute. I want to come back to this, because this is a bomb that you dropped this one on me the other day, and I went, whoa. Yeah. That's heavy, because I never did think about that before. I just took the narrative that, well, he's not getting his security clearance because he doesn't need to. And if he speaks, then he's going to be thrown in jail. But you gave me a counter to that the other day. I want to get to that, but let's talk about Danielle Smith. We can get back to the sovereignist thing. Danielle Smith seems to take 3 steps forward for the people who truly believe in freedom and common sense. And then she takes 2 ridiculous steps back and does something stupid, or says she wants a sovereign Alberta within a united Canada. And I still can't quite grip the concept of that. And nobody can really figure out, and believe me when I say this, that the rest of the country looks at Alberta as the bastion of freedom. At least that's what Canada offers, as opposed to our neighbors to the south. So when we look at Danielle Smith, we see her as the champion of common sense politically in Canada. But the people in Alberta see her a little bit differently, don't they?
I think that that's true, and I think that the duality that you're referencing there is a problem. When people ask me about that in meetings, I'm supportive of the UCP and the provincial Conservatives. I think there needs to be cohesion provincially within Alberta and the Conservatives within Alberta. I don't think we need fragmented base with regard to the NDP agenda here. When I hear her speak, I hear with one ear discussions about independence that are quite pleasing, and then I hear on the other hand a series of conversations where she's actually trying to accelerate the agenda of sovereignty within Canada, basically trying to attain some concessions in terms of routes to open sea lanes and pipelines and plastic bans and all those things, and those are all good things. But the challenge is that this issue of Alberta independence is a surging issue, and it's not good enough just to sit on the fence. And my read of what's going on in Alberta is that your analysis of it is correct. I think Danielle Smith's probably in quite a tight spot trying to navigate all of these forces. I think I kind of explain it like this in Alberta, Shadoe. We in Alberta and Western Canada have been balancing on the end, the tip of a boat, deciding whether we should step off. For most of my life, I've heard it kind of bubbling around from Saskatchewan west anyways. And we have to recognize that boat is now having holes drilled in it. And if Alberta doesn't step off, we feel as though we're going to go down with that boat. And so when I look at Danielle Smith's position, I think that she's on a clock, frankly. And at some point, there's going to be the leaders, if you will, within the membership structure of the UCP in Alberta. They're going to make a decision that they're either going to say she's slow walking and gaslighting this concept of a referendum in Alberta independence, or they're going to give her more runway. If they decide that she's a monarchist and she's gaslighting the separatist movement, I think we'll see a leadership review in September.
Now,
November.
She's on a clock. I think that clock is almost at midnight.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I would say, if I was kind of saying where are we at really, I would say we might not, those decisions may not be taken and made until the end of September, maybe earlier. But I think that even the AGM last year, she had a very strong rating. I don't know that was so much approval rating as it was, we're going to give you more runway to show us what you're really doing here, without any disrespect to Premier Smith. But I think that was the message more accurately. And these issues are coming to a head. Like we have to recognize in Canada, Shadoe, that this is not just a West-East conversation anymore. It's not a red-blue conversation. We have an American president that is looking at this country and saying, first of all, I mean, I've already alluded to it, sort out organized crime in the country. Let's deal with that. I mean, we have a Toronto Dominion Bank money laundering judgment in the US of $4 billion. Like that $4 billion fine was not a few guys sneaking across the border in Manitoba at night with cases of fentanyl. This is an industrial scale deal. The human trafficking issue is a much bigger issue than Canadians believe and understand. And Trump is aware of it and knows about it. That's why he's asking it. And the fact that we had a conservative leader actually enter into retaliatory tariffs and not say, hey, look, let's realize there's this crime going on in the country. Let's understand that it's not just, two bad guys that get together every 2 weeks and go out on a binge. It's an organized syndicate of crime. Let's call it that. Let's call it cartels. And let's actually identify them as terrorist organizations in our country and issue the appropriate enforcement orders, including lethal force, to deal with them. That's a conservative response, I think, to that kind of malicious crime. Pernicious crime in our nation, and we're not doing that. So again, we have a geopolitical reality that's going on. We don't know who the spies are that we've elected or have had elected or who are sitting in our Senate. And I'll wait for you to ask me about foreign interference and security clearances. But that for one of the benchmark nations in Western democracy and kind of classic liberalism to not be dealing with these issues at a cellular level in terms of our state security is beyond shocking. It's just it's beyond comprehension.
We always talk about the elected officials, Grant. You know, these are the people who are responsible, and ultimately they are. But the bureaucracy, the courts, the cops, even. I mean, how compromised are they that you can't even get the cops to arrest people who are firebombing cars and breaking windows in the streets? Of course, I'm talking about the Palestinian protesters. Or you can't get the judge to convict an immigrant because it might affect his immigration status moving forward. The judges now have that latitude, thanks to the Liberal government. So,
right.
You know, I mean, if we're going to rebuild this country, we've got to tear it down first, almost, it seems like, doesn't it?
Right. And I think this is the beginning of the ground that starts my answer of why I'm talking about Alberta independence from within a federal party called the United Party of Canada. But before we go to that, because I would like, for me, that's a definitely important conversation. But just on this foreign interference thing, you're right. Yeah, there's problems with the courts. Canadians feel very frustrated with their inability to access justice. When I was a kid and when I was a practicing lawyer doing criminal law, mischief charges were for skateboarders that put spray paint on bus stops. And now it's a grab all to somehow send people to prison for 8 to 10 years and deny them bail. You know, we can get into justice. If I may, I'd like to read a little passage from the NSICOP committee. You probably have read it, but I think the listeners need to hear it. This is not some kind of cordoned off micro concern where there's spying in one portion of our society.
We're going to the Pierre Poilievre clearance thing. That's what let's do it. Let's do it.
I'll take your lead. But I mean, let's understand the threat. And then once we understand the threat, then we can actually have a sensible conversation about what should be happening. Okay. So here's a page. This is a passage, an excerpt of the report that was released. Of course, it's highly classified. David McGuinty went on YouTube in May of 2020. You can go and listen to yourself. This is a quotation from paragraph 189 of page 77 of the report, for those of you that want to check out what I'm saying. And he comments, he says, the committee believes there is ample evidence that Canada is the target of significant and sustained foreign interference activities. It believes Canada is targeted to exploit the openness of our society and penetrate our fundamental institutions to meet their objectives. They target ethno-cultural communities, seek to corrupt the political process, manipulate the media, and attempt to curate debate on post-secondary campuses. Each of these activities pose a significant risk to the rights and freedoms of Canadians and to the country's sovereignty. They are a clear threat to the security of Canada. Now, I've never heard kind of a boring kind of chair of a security committee come out and actually say that. And when you actually stop and reflect on those words, I don't think they could be much more profound. We should be listening to those. That's from a report that was given to Justin Trudeau on the 30th of August, 2019. So why wouldn't we be understanding what these threats are across our nation? Why do we have Chinese police stations in our country? You know,
I'll tell you why, because the media doesn't want to talk about it and nobody wants to be called a conspiracy theorist. That's why.
Well, okay, so I'm crossing the line. I'm saying this is not normal. We should not be accepting this. This is not what my grandparents went and fought against, or my uncles went and fought against tyranny. And, you know, it's the same tyranny rooted in a different package right now. It just doesn't have guns.
So let's talk about Pierre Poilievre and his security clearance. Let's blow everybody's mind here.
Let's do it. So why don't you roll out the main argument for why everyone thinks it's okay that he hasn't actually disclosed this information?
Okay, so everybody thinks it's okay that he didn't get his security clearances. Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. Because he's already a member of the Privy Council. He's already been a minister. He's already got his clearance. If he needs to get a higher clearance, then he could go ahead and do that. That's not a problem for him. What he doesn't want to do is go ahead and sign the non-disclosure, which would make him not be able to talk about what he sees in the report,
Right.
with a penalty of jail time. So, and he wants, like, the whole point is for him to be able to talk about it to the people of this country as the leader of His Majesty's opposition, loyal opposition. That's his job.
Right.
So that's what the narrative is.
Right. Okay. And I think that's right on. I think that's a half truth. And all of us that have kids know that we have to make sure our kids don't tell us half truths, because sometimes they're lies. And in this case, this is a very awkward conversation, because when I brought this up in the debate in Camrose, the crowd erupted, because this was just so offensive that someone would challenge this narrative, right? And but the reality is that it's actually, there's another half to this story that makes the first half a misrepresentation, in my view. Okay, so we've got to remember that well, there's all kinds of defenses. I am a lawyer, and I'll kind of break this down as quickly and simply as I can. There's defenses in common law, and there's also defenses in statute for breaching a fiduciary duty. That's the kind of duty that Mr. Poilievre has to the country as the leader of the loyal opposition, I might add. And for a long time, I would have processed this discussion as simply from a common law perspective and said, if you're out walking along with your kid and someone tries to grab your kid and apprehend your child, you completely have the right to defend yourself and to defend your child, including using a proportionate force to do that, and including actually hitting, assaulting, and battering the person who's trying to take your child. And in law, the way that the legal minds think is that there's an assault and a battery, and that's chargeable under the criminal code. But there's a defense called self-defense, and is that justified in the case? And we can all understand that, and that's part of our kind of normal functioning system. It's now been embedded in our criminal code. But that principle is also true in relation to state secrets. And for a long time, I simply just talked about that self-defense. And I'm going to use a parallel here called necessity. And when there are circumstances that arise that actually make it a necessity to disclose information, that is also the logic of necessity brings a defense. Now, I had a very interesting conversation about this lately, actually in this campaign, which has kind of reignited my legal research on this issue. And I had a gentleman come up in a meeting who I'm not going to tell you too much about, just to protect him, but basically he provided me with a piece of paper that outlined perhaps a hidden or not looked upon piece of legislation back from 1985 that actually guides these issues of state secrets. We used to have a Secrecy Act in Canada. In 1985, they changed it to the Foreign Interference and Protection of Information Act 1985. And that's a very interesting read. And if you read that and kind of interrogate that piece of legislation, you'll see that, first of all, Mr. Poilievre is already under a duty, both a duty to act and to ensure that he doesn't not act, an omission, to the Canadian people. There is a clear ruling, and that's where this 14 years comes from, a clear section that if you disclose irresponsibly state secrets, that you will go to prison for 14 years. And that's just part of, the accountability of having that responsibility of information that protect a nation and our people and our sovereignty. But there's also a very clear section in that if in the event that person who holds that information reasonably believes that it's in the national interest to disclose that information, that they are completely exempted from liability under Section 15 of that legislation. So here's the myth here in this discussion. And I've asked Mr. Poilievre there. I'd love to hear a greater conversation from him on it as well. But here's the myth. First of all, the extra non-disclosure agreement is I think to do with NSICOP. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. The point is he's already under the burden of that piece of legislation, which gives him a responsibility and a requirement to weigh information and decide if it's in the national interest. And if it's not, if he looks at the information and he discovers that it's not in the national interest, then why would he not tell us that? So we don't need to worry about foreign interference, even though a Liberal MP went on YouTube to tell us.
Because maybe people would think he was copping out. Maybe.
And if he does look at it and think, yeah, we are riddled with foreign interference. That's why unexplained things are happening. That's why, there's election interference by other nations, whatever the issues. I don't know what those issues are because I haven't seen the information. And he decided on a reasonable assessment. And if he reasonably believed that information was harmful to our people or to the sovereignty of this nation, he has a full defense in Section 15 to bring the information out, albeit if all hell breaks loose because the steel bubble gets burst that's containing the truth in this country about what's really going on. And yes, he may well face a prosecution for 14 years. But the whole thing, you can look it up online right now. It says no person is guilty of an offense under the foregoing section if the person establishes that he or she acted in the public interest.
Is there a precedent for that, Grant?
Yeah. Well, I don't know that. I'm sure there probably is. I haven't done a full research on it, but the gentleman that handed me the piece of paper said, look, I was involved in national defense. And I had to rely on Section 15 twice because I had to release information that I wasn't authorized to release. But it actually preserved a situation that was of life-threatening significance to the safety and security of our personnel. And so that's anecdotal. I know that. You can't go check that out. But that kind of legislation, I'm calling it the Foreign Interference and Protection of Information Act 1985. That's a newer name. Historically, the Commonwealth countries had all called it the State Secrets Act, and that's what governed this, and it's well understood. Because who's going to let the country be jeopardized or forfeited because they're under fear of going to prison? I mean, that's we ask our soldiers to protect our nation with their lives, yes. And yet, if there's information that can be disclosed that would actually mend or maintain the equilibrium of our national sovereignty, we expect people to have the fortitude and courage, valor, may I say, even to actually step up and say, yes, I may take a bullet here, but the nation needs to know so the nation can respond.
So we're going to have to surmise here. Are we surmising that Poilievre decided to not get his security clearance because he may already know the information in there? Was it a political move? Does he have no balls?
I don't know. Maybe he's concerned that he can't get his his extra security clearance. And this is the point here, Shadoe. This legislation that puts him in the same place that he would have been if he had gotten his extra security clearance that we keep hearing about, he's already obligated under this legislation with the same penalty. The only difference, and I don't, this is the thing that I don't know inside the conservative world, is the security clearance that they're talking about, the NSICOP security clearance. And if that's the case, if you take the necessary security clearance to get the NSICOP information, you waive your parliamentary privilege. Okay. And the point is that what you say then in Parliament can't be held personally against you. But in relation to the formation of that NSICOP stands for the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. If you sign on to the NSICOP committee, you waive your parliamentary privilege. Okay. If they're talking about that as the security clearance, David McGuinty made it very clear that he would provide the necessary pointers on the information to brief any parliamentarians so that they would know. He makes the comments on the YouTube video that they would know the degree of the threat that would not compromise their parliamentary privilege, but allow them to speak to the issue. And the challenge for us as Canadians is that there's really nowhere to hide in this argument, because he's already under the burden of the statute, both by duty and by duty to act and not to omit his duty. No omission. So this is kind of one of those things where, yes, maybe he can't get this NDA. Everyone's bought in to this discussion about not getting this non-disclosure agreement, which I'm I think maybe the NSCOP.
Not can't, but won't.
He won't, because it's going to bind his parliamentary privilege. But as the leader of the loyal opposition, why would you not at least tell Canadians that I've looked at the information and there's no threat, or simply disclose the information if it's in the national interest to do so? So this whole thing about if I get it, I'm going to go to jail. No, he's already under the mandate of going to jail if he releases the information. So
well, we've had opposition leaders get their security clearance and go and look at this stuff. I think Elizabeth May and Jagmeet Singh at the time both did.
Yeah,
and they came back and said, no, nothing to see here.
Sure. I mean, I think that in my view of both of them would be that they're ideologically connected to the betrayal of Canada.
Yeah. But now the question is Pierre Poilievre tied to that same thing?
Well, yeah, fair enough. And I think that's why I'm pushing on this issue, because the explanation, it seems more like camouflage than the truth. And if he actually came out and said, hey, you know what? I am under this legislation. I've seen the information, and I'm actually telling Canadians that there's nothing to see here. I don't reasonably believe that there's a threat, even though the NSCOP committee has told us that there is. And because I don't reasonably believe it, I'm deeming it not to be in the national interest and not disclosing it. But he's not even saying that. Why not?
It's something to ponder for sure. Let's talk about the political parties and the change that we need. First of all, where's Max Bernier in this? You'd think that he would be running in this riding just to get himself a seat for the People's Party. Where is he?
I think he's wiser than that. Let's say it that way. I did read something today that there's kind of a little spark of Quebec separatism going on, and he has written a letter into. I just literally read this afternoon. He's written a letter into is it the Bloc de Québécois, that he's going to support the separatist movement in Quebec, and then by extension align with the separatist movement in Alberta. And that's a great way to kind of shoehorn some support in the West. He has certainly been a federalist. I'm not sure what he'll do with his membership on the Privy Council with regard to that issue. But I think maybe I think the PPC is losing steam in terms of freedom. The discussions about freedoms are just not enough. It's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, this is what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, so if the Conservative Party of Canada is not really a conservative party, I think we've established that, and there's many people have been saying that for quite some time, but it's really been our only alternative for quite some time now, and they know that. But the brand loyalty might be fading there. So we have the People's Party on the one hand, we have the United Party, your party, on the other hand. Is there a difference between the PPC and I don't want to call you guys the UPC because that name is already taken, but the United Party of Canada? I mean, where are the differences between the People's Party and your party?
Well, I think for me, the libertarian philosophy is a hollow one that kind of ends up in kind of, a selfish nihilism that doesn't work in our country. It actually, it doesn't resonate with the values that actually built the country. And I think as people start to examine that and think about it, they will come to that conclusion or see it. I think the bigger conversation now is that I have crossed the line just as a Canadian, even in looking at the brokenness, the rotten basement, using that metaphor that that was in that clip. We have a constitutional system that has a lot of challenges when you start to talk about legitimacy, because when you look at the 1867 Act, and I'll maybe be a bit of a legal nerd here, but when you look at the 1867 Act, there was a clause in it, Section 2, which authorized the passing of sovereignty from one monarch to another as each monarch died. In 1893, that section was revoked. And what that essentially meant legally, that after that monarch, who at that time oversaw that legislation being passed, whenever Queen Victoria died, the sovereignty of Canada, the control and ownership of Canada, actually went into like a holding pattern. because in law, there's not really vacuums. There's always a pathway for a right or an ownership or an interest to go somewhere. And in that case, that's a revision to our BNA Act 1867, what we call our Constitution Act, didn't have a way to pass the ownership of the Dominion of Canada. There was, because of the legislation that was passed revoking, and that was 1893, I think, or some Statute Reform Act of 1893, all the British legislation. So when Queen Victoria died, then what was Canada's status? And I think the British held this kind of legal anomaly for about 30 years, and then they passed the Statute of Westminster. We can talk about Quebec not signing our 1982 Constitution, all those things. But
I want to ask you, you know what, you're a historian, man. You've got a lot of knowledge here, and there's all kinds of interesting, novel things that have been flying around independent media circles for the past 5 years or so. One of them being the actual Constitution of Canada is not in Canada. When Pierre Elliott Trudeau went to have that document patriated in the UK in 1982, he came home with a photocopy. Is that true?
That's what I understand true. And this, I think, probably is where I'm trying to go, because if you actually see this kind of this chronology of our history, that's why that observation that you're making is so important to Canadians at the end of the story, because what happened was there was this anomaly for 30 years where Canada existed without any kind of real control. And I'm guessing what happened was the Foreign and Commonwealth Office simply allowed it to live in limbo. And then in 1931, there was a statute called the Westminster Act that was passed that essentially severed sovereignty of the British Crown over Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Republic of Ireland, and Canada. And what that did was it finally took that sovereignty that didn't pass to the next heir, because there was no succession clause in the BNA Act anymore because it was revoked. And it gave it not to Canada, but it gave the sovereignty to the provinces of Canada that existed in 1931. That's an incredibly potent legal position to examine. They actually outlined that there needed to be a constitutional convention, and the people of those provinces needed to decide exactly what they wanted to have as a governance mechanism, and they could decide that. And most of the people in Canada in 1931 were farming or fishing or pulling stumps up. They weren't reading legal bills from Westminster in London. And that mandate that in 1931 should have made each province decide what kind of a province or state they wanted to be, how they wanted to be governed, and then came together a couple of years later, once they got that figured out, and decided what they wanted the federal infrastructure of the country to look like. And instead, what we got was this 1931 legislation basically being appropriated by the powers that be. Let's call them the gray suits in 1931. And they simply stepped behind the curtain that was the crown. And we've had this notion of the crown exist for 94 years. Now, sometimes people say, this just isn't historical fluffiness. Sometimes people say, and I've heard lawyers say this, that the 1931 Westminster Act is quackery, and there's not a court in the land that would necessarily recognize it. At least that's what I've heard them say. I'm not saying that that's right. It does create a massive legal issue, because that is actually the sovereignty that the Canadian people were given in 1931. And I say, if we think that legislation is quackery, we need to talk to the people in the Republic of Ireland, because they established a constitutional republic out of the 6 same pages of paper that our sovereignty was given to our provinces.
So wait, let me stop you here. 1931, the Statute of Westminster established that all the provinces of this country were sovereign unto themselves. Right?
The sovereignty passed to the provinces to be determined by the people in the province through the provincial government structure in terms of what form of government they wanted to have and to maintain. And they really should have then decided what the Confederation of Canada looked like.
So I don't recall anything in history between 1931 and 1995 that talks about any kind of referendum or anybody in any province talking about what sort of style of government they want. Do you recall anything like that? I don't. Is there anything at all?
Ironically, there's a letter that was given by an Alberta MP in I don't know, probably in the late 50s, early 60s, that went to René Lévesque, and allegedly this argument that I'm talking about here was actually used to advance the Quebec sovereignty movement.
I've heard about that. And so what did the 1982 Constitution and Charter of Rights and Freedoms actually do? Because Quebec never did sign the thing.
No. And
So
I
what
think,
is it?
I mean, I think technically and I'm not a constitutional convention junkie in terms of reading all the stuff, but as I understand it, our constitution is actually not completed finally passing the final reading in terms, because it hasn't been signed off and ratified. So we're kind of this de facto functioning system. And it's just ironic that, and this takes us into deeper conversations, because when in the last 30 years of our lives have we ever heard anybody talking about God Save the King? God Save the King. Poilievre's acceptance speech, he must have said God Save the King 6 or 8 times. And all of a sudden we have King Charles rolled out to do a throne speech.
And where he gave a land acknowledgement too, which was ridiculous.
So, if you want to talk about the control functions above the national structure of this nation, if you want to talk about New World Order, you want to talk about, Trump's war against the deep state. The deep state just isn't some rogue structure within the U.S. government. It's an integrated globalist agenda that is interconnected in its strategy. And if you heard, I think this is one of the most compelling thing in all those people out there that are the living and the private people that understand the significance of the corporation and the sovereign state. You heard President Trump say in his inauguration state, I'm going to restore the Republic of the United States, which essentially means he's purging out the corporation of the United States that was established to gather up the tax proceeds to feed the international banking systems. This is a much deeper conversation, and I don't know actually outside of maybe the farthest fringe podcasting if anyone's actually seriously broached this conversation.
I have a couple of times. There was a guy called Doug Force. He's since passed away, but I had him on a couple of times, and man, was he fascinating and like you, steeped in knowledge about all of this.
We have to. I mean, Shadoe, I think that it's not good enough just to say, well, we don't understand why things are happening the way that they are. We're just going to have to accept them. Things are happening strategically for a reason. When you hear Justin Trudeau saying we're going to become the first post-nation state, or we're being reset, or why is there so much foreign interference with the Chinese? I'll say it. It's the Chinese and perhaps other governments, Iranian perhaps, and perhaps even Russian, that are operating in this nation. To what end? The Canadian people don't know that. And I'll tell you this. I mean, Stephen Harper passed a piece of legislation called the Foreign Interference Protection Act, which allowed foreign governments to use their national military infrastructure to defend national investment in Canada. And that opened the door up for foreign troops to be in this country. I have a hard time getting my mind around how many there are. I could guess, but I'll tell you this unequivocally: the American intelligence infrastructure estimates that we have 500,000 of them in Canada, and that's why America is looking at Canada and saying, "You guys really need to sort out your house, because you're actually becoming a destabilizing threat to continental security, and we're not going to have it. You'll be the 51st state."
So when we get back to the deep state conversation, then, my opinion of that has been that it's, the bureaucracy pretty much. You go through, if you've got a conservative government in there, most of the bureaucrats are liberals, and they have been all their lives, and they're going to do a slow walk in inputting the legislation that any conservative government will go ahead and legislate, right? But it's more than that. That's how they're doing it. But who is doing it? How many different competing entities are there in this? Or is it all part of the same thing? I mean, this is where I try to wrap my head around this, Grant, because it's a puzzle, and the picture keeps changing, and people keep taking pieces away and adding other ones that don't quite fit. We got China. We've got the Israeli thing. I don't know what that's all about, but it seems as though they control quite a bit of policy in the United States anyhow. And it seems as though, not lately with the Carney government, but Poilievre, once again, we're going to protect Israel with everything we've got right to the end. They're our friends. And I'm kind of wondering why that is, again, considering that there's been a lot of talk about what's really going on in the Gaza region in the last couple of years. And it's not good.
Yeah.
I mean, what is going on here, man?
And I think this is the discussion, right, Shadoe? Because we've essentially grown up in a post-World War II understanding of kind of a Western order of, natural justice, if you will, even between nations. And I think a lot of people are having to and are reviewing some of the behaviors that they're seeing in terms of, I think, for example, I think that people were very surprised at how the implementation of the mRNA vaccine was rolled out, and why certain countries advanced them so quickly. I think Israel is an example of that.
They were the first.
They were the first. And, if you're looking at the evidence, and I don't want to go down a vaccine trail, I think that there's a lot of truth that needs to be told about the vaccine in Canada from a Canadian perspective. If we bring it back down to the kitchen table here in this conversation, our people were completely coerced into that, taking that vaccine. You couldn't eat in a restaurant, you couldn't travel, and many people had to choose between feeding their family and paying their mortgage, and took it. We have a rapid increase in unexplained deaths post treatment or post vaccination. It's almost a taboo topic in this country. It shouldn't be, because if you look at the Department of Vital Statistics, right from kind of from COVID on, March of 2020 through to March of 2021, there's not really any big deviation in the death statistics in terms of the years prior. When you start rolling out the vaccine in April, May, June, August of 21, you start to see it spike. That's a statistical reality. There's all kinds of narratives to try and explain it, but these aren't just these aren't 2% deviations. These are radical deviations. I've looked at some of the insurance corporations in the U.S. that are reporting on to their shareholders on the costs of doing business, and they're noting significant increases. Like in the insurance industry, there was one black we'll call it a black event, kind of a shocking event. They had a 2.5% deviation from the normal statistics curves on death in 200 years, and they freaked out about 2%. And we've had standard deviations excess in terms of 25% and higher in some strata of age groups. So that's an undeniable reality. I mean, politicians can look at that and say, well, we have an explanation for that. I think when the lawyers actually look at that, they're going to see a causal link and they're going to attribute it to something. And the more research that's coming out in relation to the disclosure of what the actual contents of what was in that vaccine is going to be shocking. And that's why we must never allow the National Citizens Inquiry report to be lost, and why we need to protect some of these doctors that are doing this important research, because this nation can't heal until there's justice for that.
Well, there's so much that, I mean, you brought that up, and I think that's a great point. But let's talk about what happened recently with this walking in the woods ban, outright ban in Nova Scotia. And they're talking about doing the same thing in Newfoundland and Labrador and New Brunswick. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
You can't go into the woods. You get a $25,000 fine. Who puts the ideas into these ridiculous politicians' heads? And then they try to justify them, saying, well, we don't think you're going to start a fire. That's ridiculous. We think that if you fall and break your leg, nobody's going to be able to come and get you because they're off fighting a fire someplace else.
Well, this is the climate hysteria, right? And it feeds fear. And if people have a tendency to want to be codependent on the government and be kept safe all the time, which is kind of the ideological shift in this country, then you're gonna fall into line with all those things. And we saw that during COVID. And I guess that's where I was at the beginning of this conversation, to say this has been a really easy week for me, because Canada's just providing tons of evidence of the deviations of sensible thought that are actually evidencing the undermining of what should be upholding our nation in terms of culture, values, and traditions. So this BC Supreme Court ruling one has now undermined any certainty in terms of title. There will be financial lawyers working all over the place trying to figure out how to mitigate that risk, now that a potential Indigenous claim can undermine their security on a title. Like, imagine those conversations in boardrooms across the country, right? And
well, you know what, I've heard too, that there has been some independent media saying, look, don't worry about that ruling in BC, even though it was the longest court case in Canadian history. It took 512 days over 7 or 8 years, because the native bands in BC don't want your private property. They didn't ask for it, so they're not getting that. But what's to stop them from asking in the future, now that they know they can win? I mean, this is a dangerous precedent got set in BC last week.
Well, our nation prospers because of certainty and understanding of the rule of law, and whatever the agenda is. And I suppose you're trying to wedge out of us both in this conversation of what is it that's this corrosive assaulting on our understanding of culture, values, traditions, laws, and ethics in this country, because that's why everyday
Grant, it's like the law of gravity is no longer functioning regularly.
It's not. And I think that is what we have to look and say, is because, I guess for me, I really got the red pill on this issue. Okay. I was asking the normal Canadian questions as a lawyer and saying, I don't like the fact that I'm seeing these shifts in the burden of proof, so that all of a sudden, we used to think that it was actually completely an unchanging principle that you were innocent until proven guilty. But now there's these laws happening where you're guilty unless you can prove you're innocent. And this is pre-2018 stuff. I really got red pilled, Shadoe. Here's this is maybe a great story if I have a minute to tell it.
Yeah.
I went to a by-election meeting in 2020. In provincial by-election meeting, and there was a candidate running, and I went to hear what she had to say. But the lady that actually stood up to introduce her, she was the owner of this cafe in the Fraser Valley, and she stood up and she said, look, she goes, we really need good people in government that are prepared to tell the truth, because I'm an elected councillor, and my mayor has assigned me to a committee of people, and we're doing stuff that I'm really not comfortable with, in terms of things that are going to change Canada in ways I can't really explain. And she kind of did this little preamble, and I went up to her afterwards and I said, look, can you fill me in a little bit on this? And I started asking her some questions, and she told me the name that there's a not-for-profit in BC that basically is the host facilitator for 52 people coming from across the country, federal, provincial, municipal, and Indigenous elected and governmental workers. And they come together and they are basically working across family, justice, environment, law, and education. And essentially their role is to take Agenda 2030 and to massage it in to those 4 sectors of government across those 5 headings. And that's the ideological shift. So she told me the name. I went away and researched it. I found out that their annual support was 95% or greater from one donor, the Canadian government. And essentially what that work was a shadow committee of Parliament, outside of parliamentary committee, outside of parliamentary scrutiny, and they're sitting doing this work. And I went to her and I said to her, I said, you know, what you told me really freaked me out. I said, actually, someday someone's going to look at this work in this country and say that what you're doing there is actually treasonous. They're going to look backwards at this and see that this was a petri dish for the pollinization of a new operating program into our nation that's actually undermining our culture, values, traditions, laws, and ethics. And you're going to be judged on that. And so she says, you know what, I think you're right, because I'm not very happy with it at all. So I asked her, I said, hey, would you mind smuggling some papers out of that committee for me? Which she did. And when I read those papers, I was shocked, because they were sitting and openly discussing modifying the understanding of words like property and ownership and energy, and figuring out how to massage in a collectivist agenda into all of our strata of government. Okay. I was so blown away at the language that was being used that I sat down, I wrote a reflection paper to actually break down what their thought was and how distorted it was in relation to what Canada actually is, or what we believe it is. And one of the most shocking things about those notes that came out of that working committee were that they were actually sitting talking about in their notes, like writing about it. And they're saying, what we really need to do is recognize that everyday Canadians like you and I, or anybody else that we talk to that's upset about where the country's going, is that those everyday Canadians have blind spots, and we need to figure out how to navigate around those blind spots so that it can become palatable for this change of operating system to be massaged into our nation. Okay. Now, that was
this committee you're talking about called Impact Canada out of the Privy Council?
No, it's not. It was essentially a clandestine committee. They weren't allowed to take their notes out. They met once a month. They did a lot of work, and it was visited by officials from Ottawa to ensure they were on track with what they were doing. And it was all predicated upon Agenda 2030. And that's where we're getting these changes from. That's why we're seeing the development of 15-minute cities. I came across one county in Ontario when I was speaking out there, and the farmers there are dealing with the local county board, trying to figure out the square footage area of their barns, on the area of the roof on their barns. And what they're doing is, once they figure out the value of the area of the square footage on the roof of the barns, they're calculating, multiplying that by the annual rainfall. They're figuring out the volume of water that's displaced from that roof. And then they're creating a tax, or trying to create a tax, on that displaced water hitting the sewage system in the county. That's Agenda 2030 at work. It sounds ridiculous, but it's coming in, 6 of one and half a dozen of another ways in this nation. And I was so shocked at this. I mean, this is pre-politics for me. This is just like, something's wrong here that is going on in our nation. There's got to be an explanation. I bumped into this. I saw these papers. I was just like, I cannot believe that this is being allowed to happen. And so I sent this paper out to a bunch of different people in the country. I sent it out to some lawyer friends of mine and said, look, what do you think about this? This is what this is what I've seen. I sent it out to basically a pathway that it ended up inside the RCMP. I sent it out to some former Conservative MPs that I knew, and those two pathways created some interest. And I ended up in a conversation with, I don't know, when you're talking to plainclothes officers, are you talking to the RCMP? I think so, let's say. And that was a very interesting conversation. And I met with them with that whistleblower in 2021. I wasn't acting for them. I'm just trying to be a guide helping at that stage. And when we finished that interview, basically the off the record comments in that interview was, again, spring of 2021, was, Grant, if you had come to us with this document and this whistleblower 5 years ago, we'd have told you were crazy. So he's talking about 2016. If we come to us in 2016, we thought you were crazy. If you come to us in 2018, 2019, we would have freaked out, because there was so much foreign interference going on in the country that we didn't know where it was coming from, and we knew that it had an ideological strategy to it. So we would have completely freaked out. But he said where we're at right now in 2021, there's so much foreign interference that all we can do is treat this as a philosophical paper, and we'll take note of it, and we'll take note of that not-for-profit and whatever.
Philosophical paper?
Oh, that's a quote. Okay. The conversation with the two MPs that contacted me, because it ended up in their hands, I'm not going to give you their names because I said I wouldn't, but it's indicative of the malaise inside the Conservative Party. When I got on the in-camera, what I call the private meeting, with them online, because it was still the high days of COVID, they were all excited. Like, they were quite happy. And I said, guys, did you read the paper? And they're like, yeah, we absolutely did. We're like really glad to read this paper. And I'm like, well, why? And he said, because we know there's something going wrong, that it's kind of unraveling the country, but we didn't know what was behind it, that where all these changes are coming from all at once. And I said, well, isn't that great? Oh, what are you going to do about it? And they're like, well, you know what? It's just not politically pragmatic for us in the Conservative Party right now to do anything about it. And I was like, I really fused me out, because I was like, that's the only reason you're elected, is to actually protect the country from stuff like this. I would expect you to be out in front of Parliament rolling around in your ginch until the media shows up to ask you what the hell you're doing, rolling around in your underwear in front of Parliament. And then you say, look, this is what's going on. Our country's being betrayed ideologically, and let's follow the money. Let's follow the narrative. And they just said, like, we can't touch it. It's quote, it's not politically pragmatic. And that is when I started to see that even when presented with this stuff, there was a validation of it on both those conversations. It wasn't like, hey, we don't believe this. No, there was a complete validation of it on both fronts. One group was overrun with foreign interference, and this is the spring of 2021. And the other one had what? That's where I say there was no balls.
Cowards.
It's the same situation now that we're talking about with foreign interference, for why we're not explaining what these forces are that are actually unraveling our nation.
And in the meantime, we've got 400 ostriches who are on the cusp of being killed in Edgewood, British Columbia, because of a rogue, in my opinion, a rogue agency that is answerable to nobody, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, based upon the results of 2 PCR tests in December. 2. They want to kill 400 ostriches out there.
But that's not the real story.
Of course not. The real story is control of the food supply, control of the rural land. I mean, there's not much more rural you can get than Edgewood, British Columbia, at least in the southern part of our country. And
also, there's scientific research being done on the cell structure on the eggs that has profound significance in terms of antiviral health for treatment of certain diseases and
natural antibodies, right? So that's going to upend the vaccine agenda also.
So how does that work? This is the conversation, and actually is part of what's feeding the death culture in this country.
Dude, we've been talking about this deep stuff now for the last hour and 25 minutes, and the people who are watching this are enraptured with this, and I think that's great. And I know that people have been waking up slowly over the past few years.
Yeah.
But how do we get them? Like these people who are still sleepwalking through this. I mean, I had a show earlier this week with Jeff Evely. He's the guy who got the $28,000 ticket for walking into the woods in Nova Scotia. And it was a little real, and people are still going on there going, wow, people are looking for anything to be upset about these days. Don't you understand? It's Tinder dry out here. People shouldn't be allowed to go in. Like, this breaks my heart every time I see somebody say something so stupid like that, because they have absolutely no, like, elbows up. Mm-hmm. Like we ever had a chance against the Americans in any way on anything except maybe a hockey game. Right. So if we still have 70% of the people in this country asleep at the switch, we're doomed. How do we wake them up is my question. So
let's just talk about that. That whole concept of what we're talking about. Like, I've already mentioned the fact that the Liberals and the Conservatives in the general election chose to protect organized crime in this country. other than the Canadian people and their businesses. That's why we had two government leaders both pushing for retaliatory tariffs. And we've got a president in the US now who understands, I think, very well what's going on in Canada, has probably given up on the leadership in the country. And if you look at what he's done in the last 2 weeks, if you follow any of the US stuff, I mean, I think it was just this week, he actually assumed control of the municipal police force in DC. Yep. And interlinked the engine, if you will, of the National Guard into that and brought it under the White House control structure because they're cleaning stuff up. And if I understand things correctly, that's happening in other cities across the country, in addition to engaging the release of special forces into Central and South America to deal with cartels. Yep. So there is something going on here that is dealing.
They also got a bounty on Nicolas Maduro, I think, too, don't they?
I don't know. But my point is that there is an agenda that is moving toward these entrenched forces. If we want to talk about it as organized crime, if we want to talk about it as parasitic foreign interference in our country, or if we want to talk about a human membrane of evil that seeks to repress and keep our fellow citizens impoverished and almost walking zombies in terms of talking about symptoms rather than root issues. I think that's exactly what Trump's talking about. And I think those characteristics make up what it is that we're actually fighting against. And we just have the veneer, the apparatus of these agendas housed in our political institutions. And we're talking about symptomatic issues all the time.
But we're talking about waking the people up. Let's get back to that one. And it always comes back to me that, have you ever seen a video of a cult member trying to be deprogrammed? Mm-hmm. It happened. I watched this thing on Scientology a few years ago, and it was fascinating. It was a long process to get this person to start thinking straight again. And I see that with the LGBTQ. I see that with, Carney's spending $14 million to indoctrinate kids into this climate catastrophe in schools across the country. That was announced a couple of days ago. So more indoctrination. How, we got to do a mass deprogramming, and we've got to do it fast, because they still think that we're the ones wearing the tinfoil hats, bro. And that's not the case at all. We're the ones who are actually seeing clearly more than anything.
Well, if I may, let me say that I think that this is one of the reasons I'm contending for Alberta independence, because I believe now that all of these issues that you and I are talking about are more holes that are going in the boat called Canada, or Canada 1.0, for the purpose of this conversation. And it's my view that if Alberta actually steps off that boat and becomes an independent nation, it can set up the kind of constitutional republic framework that we want to see, that entrenches those inalienable rights that we don't want to see tampered with by activist courts, which we've seen in our nation. And if that life raft can be launched and Alberta becomes independent, it will actually be a platform that can redeem or rescue the rest of Canada when the wheels come off the economy. And I think this is why, I love Canada. I believe we should be together, but I think we're past the point of return now. I don't think we'll ever get the Constitution open to actually reform the nation. I don't think, why would they ever let the line of credit be released when they never have to pay it back? Like, they're never going to let Alberta go. The amount of money.
It's like a bust out, the mob doing a bust out job.
It is. So, we can have all these conversations. There's a lot of hope right now in Alberta that the referendum will bring clarity to that. And if you read the Clarity Act, there's about 15 conditions that have to meet to be met to get to a conversation where there's a negotiation. So how long is that going to take? And we've already got the question that has been put for the referendum being litigated by Alberta elections. So, there's lots of challenges, and I think that there will be. And again, that's why I think the 1931 Act is so important. But to your earlier question, this is exactly what I'm doing. This is why I'm contending for this within a federal platform, because I actually believe the country should be together. But I think that the way we're going to rescue this country is actually to establish an independent Alberta that can then bring liberty to the rest of the Canadians once the wheels fall off, because we have $2.5 trillion in debt. We don't have a budget. And how long can we keep going? We've already lost over 40% of our spending power in our dollar in the last 3 years. So when's this going to end? And adding tariffs on with the Americans because we won't clean up organized crime isn't going to help the Canadians have more spending power. It's going to make us poorer. It's going to make groceries more expensive, and it's going to increase the cost of living. So, we really need to look at these deeper values. It's just like this conversation. And I say to people, we're having symptom conversations. And they say, well, what do you mean by that? I say, well, in our lifetime, the last 30, 40 years, when have we ever had any conversation about Jews in Canada, 300,000 Jews in Canada feeling unsafe because there's people marching around in the country calling for the death of our nation or burning our flag? When have we ever had those conversations? And when you hear our politicians, they'll say, oh, we're opposed to anti-Semitism. And I'll say, well, isn't that great? Where does the anti-Semitism come from? The microwave? Like you climb out of the coffee pot? Like that, and we buy into this kind of superficial garbage about, I'm opposed to anti-Semitism. But I say, okay, that's coming from where? Somewhere. I don't think Muslim people per se are bad, but there is an ideology in militant Islam that is not compatible with Canadian people. And we need to have the conversation about our culture, values, and traditions in our country with immigrants that actually seem to hate our country.
Well, I mean, we can talk about all of the immigrants that have come from India as well, who are defecating in the streets and think that's just quite all right. And all of the different languages. I mean, I have no problem with people immigrating to our country and speaking a different language. I just don't want to hear it every 10 feet. And that's the way it's been in the last few years.
And isn't it interesting that Quebec has passed rejected multiculturalism, is working to pass an integration act because they're recognizing that multiculturalism has failed. We actually need, when people come to this country, they need to be Canadians. We celebrate our heritage, if you will, but we're Canadian.
And what is the number one thing that holds a country together, a country's culture together? I would say that would be language, right?
It would be language and an understanding of a shared
beliefs,
values, traditions, beliefs, and ethics. And I would say further, if you want to take this conversation a little deeper, I would say we're here in this situation because we've unplugged that understanding of culture, values, and traditions from the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And I used to talk about this, and people get quite rankled until Jordan Peterson rolled out and said, let's all recognize, the Judeo-Christian values are the ones that have built the best country and the best countries in the world. And why would we have a problem with that? And in fact, when I talk to Canadians, I'll say the values, the Judeo-Christian values, and when you want to assign them to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to get a little bit theological, if your viewers can stand that, that's the God within our supremacy of God and the rule of law. The best thing about that God is that he says you have the absolute right to freely reject him. And that's the framework for our liberty in this country. But what that whole discussion about culture, values, and traditions do for Canada is it plugs it into a system of values that's actually integrated and defensible and allows us to say no to things, because that's not what Canadian culture is about. Forget religion.
People are scared, though, Grant. I mean, I just want to wrap it with this. There's a MP called Rupert Lowe in the UK. I'm not sure which party he's with, but he tweeted out just today, said, you could call me racist, transphobic, Islamophobic, xenophobic, and the rest. I couldn't give a shit. I want my country back.
Right.
And I think that more of us need to be able to stand up proudly and say, we want our Canada back.
Yeah. I think it's absolutely right. And I think the UK has had longer, well, it's two things. It has a much more entrenched first culture that's homogenous, and it has had longer in terms of diversity of culture that hasn't integrated. And they're further down the road in the development of this discussion. There's a academic, I can't remember his name now, forgive me, whoever that is, out of King's College in London. He's basically a professor of war, and he's done a lot of analysis on essentially the ingredients that make up the recipe for civil war. And he says in his analysis, there's several Western societies, Western nations that are on the cusp of civil war.
We are at war.
We are.
It's just a different kind of war.
He means kinetic. He's talking about, physical confrontations and not some kind of, ideological disagreement. And I think that, at the beginning of this conversation, we talked about pots boiling. And I think beneath the waterline, there is a lot of people have disconnected from the political process. I find it interesting that while I'm the hearts and minds of convincing people that have given up on politics because they don't think we're going to vote our way out of this, to see that whatever happens in this country, we actually have to have a pre-government or an integrated system of thought that is governance, if you will, that can be a voice that can speak to the people if in the event that there is a confrontation. And that's how a lot of people are processing. And I think that this whole discussion is so still veneered in how visceral the feelings are, because Albertans are a benevolent and generous people. This is no longer about the money. This is about the passing of laws that violate our sense of culture, values, and traditions, the parental authority, what we think about the value of life, the fact that there are medical decisions being made, economic medical decisions that are being made. I met a guy, or heard about a guy in the riding here that I'm running in, and he'd had an industrial accident 20 years ago. He was denied getting, maybe the fourth iteration of surgery that he needed on his face because of this industrial thing. He says he's in a lot of pain. And October 11th, he's booked a MAID appointment.
What?
Yeah. Because he just is like, I can't really deal with the pain. I can't afford the surgery. So I guess I just got to tap out. And that's there's a value discussion here for Canadians, because our nation has inherently had an understanding of the sanctity and dignity of human life, except now we're approaching it with a utilitarian perspective, where we're simply allowing people to be switched off because they're not contributing or they're costing too much. And this is a very, very, very slippery slope, a dangerous slope.
Very dangerous.
That's why we can't talk symptoms anymore. And that's why when I hear Pierre Poilievre push through his teeth that he believes in faith, family, and freedom, it makes me sick, because there's no freedom in the discussion. There's no faith in it. And there's sure no family, because Bill C-4 inserted the government between the parent and the child. I can't take my 16-year-old into the bar side of Boston Pizza because of our alcohol laws. But if I try and stop one of my kids going on hormone replacement or irreversibly removing their genitalia, I'm going to prison for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's faith. That every faith community in the country would be abhorred at that. That's about family. And that's about the freedom to raise our children and to have the kind of flourishing life where we don't have government in every pocket of our daily lives.
Well, Grant, even faith has been infiltrated.
Sure.
Some of the churches, right? I mean,
yeah.
Some of them are too scared to step out and say, hey, you know what? This is wrong. And we saw that happen during COVID.
And there's a conversation for us. I mean, I know the time's up here, but I mean, I understand that the Liberal government is developing a legislation that will remove the charitable status from Christian churches in this country.
Yep.
So all the silent churches that have been out there thinking, hey, we just got to stay in our lane, or the war, that inherent war that goes on between pastors and their boards about what actually a Christian teaching should be in society versus what the board's risk analysis is for their insurance when it comes to those kinds of conflicts playing out in the church. You won't have to worry about that anymore. And they're actually in conjunction, if my intel is correct, what they're talking about is not only losing the charitable status, but changing the capital gains rules on church assets.
Yeah. So
suddenly, if it's going to be one thing to lose that protection of the charitable status, but it's going to be another thing if all of a sudden when those churches sell, they've got a 30 or 40 or 50% capital gains tax. You want to eradicate the Christian church in Canada and push them underground?
That's what they're trying to do.
Sure.
It seems to me, though, I mean, and this is fine. This is a great example of people organizations just trying to stay out of it. We're just going to stay out of it. We're just going to toe the line. We're going to keep our heads down. We're going to keep doing what we do quietly here, and they'll leave us alone. That's not how it works, right? Eventually, they will come and get you. You can be as quiet as you want. It doesn't matter. They will come for you at some point. So you may as well speak up now.
Shadoe, and this is what, you've hit it on the head here, man. This is what's going on in Alberta. People are coming to the conclusion that they can no longer have the false hope that this is just going to disappear and they can kick the can down the road.
Can't do it.
It's coming at us on all fronts, and that's actually why I'm standing up and coming on a show like this tonight to talk about the truth of what's going on. And all kinds of people are talking about what the WEF means. That's how people on the street are referring to this. I want to call the human membrane of evil, the gray suits, the men in black, whatever metaphor you want to use. They'll refer to it as the WEF. They're doing their research. They're reading stuff like and understanding that there's a 13 black nobility that has been at the epicenter of demonic control in this world. Let's call it evil straight up. And it is anti-human. It's an anti-human death cult, and it doesn't want to see freedom, health, liberty, family. What it wants is slavery, bondage, and control of mineral assets and energy, because that's where the control levers are in society. And until we recognize that is what is embedded in the mask of post-nationalism and the reset and the foreign interference, whatever its face is, we're not having the real conversation about power in this country. And I love this country, and I love the people in this country, and I think we're being betrayed. And I know that there's people that have already arrived at that conclusion, and they're hoping that we can find a diplomatic and political solution to this. Let's put it that way.
Guys, full disclosure, this is to the viewers. I talked to Grant on the phone a couple of days ago, and I said, we're going to go deep this time. He goes, oh, yeah. I said, because last time we didn't. And he said, no, we're going to go. We did. This has been a fantastic conversation, and it's not even over yet. We got to continue this at some point soon, Grant. I want to wish you all the best in the by-election on Monday in Battle River-Crowfoot. You never know what's going to happen. They're going to write your name in on the ballot. Grant Abraham. That's United right. Party of Canada. And if it doesn't work out and you don't win, and I'm thinking that people are still married to their brand, politically speaking, I'm sure you're going to be very active in the Alberta sovereignty movement going forward, or something like that.
The conversation is not stopping. It's not stopping.
All right, man. Thanks for coming on tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. There is Grant Abraham, everybody. That was a fantastic conversation, and we got to continue it very soon. The extension, how do we talk to these people? How do we wake them up? We have been talking about this for, 5 years now? And I'm still seeing boneheaded comments coming in on my Instagram, on my Facebook, on my X, on whatever social media. It may have been happening in the comments tonight. I don't know. I wasn't able to look at many of them in the middle of this discussion with Grant, but how do we break them out of their slumber? How do we deprogram them from the cult they happen to be in? Or how do we just get them to speak up? If they understand what's going on, they see it all around them. Like I said earlier, the law of gravity is not in effect right now. And how can you not notice that? But they're just too scared to say anything. They don't want to risk their job. They don't want to risk their social standing, their place in the community. They don't want to be thought of as a tinfoil hat. So we're going to explore that tonight in the extension for the All Access Nitehawks on ShadoeDavis.com, and we're going to do that in a couple of minutes. For the rest of you guys, I love you all, and I appreciate you all, and I will catch you again tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Central. Bye for now.